Good morning, grade 8. This is your chapter 4 review. It's 4 questions, one from all 4 sections of chapter 4. The first question here gives you a picture and asks you to describe the percentage. The second question underneath it gives you fractions, decimals, or percents, and asks you to write them 3 different ways, either as a fraction, decimal, or a percent. The third question asks you to calculate mentally or using a calculator those percentages of a number. And the last question asks you to calculate a discount and then a tax, or combining 2 percents together. So we'll start with the first question, which is this picture, and it asks I didn't photocopy or didn't cut and paste all the stuff over. I think it was 2 of them, wasn't it? All right, there we go there. That's what the picture is. So the question is, what percent is this representing? So we think of these, again, as gas tanks, and that's how we've been doing it all along. This is one full gas tank. So your gas tank is 100% full. Plus, in the trunk, you have 95% of a gas tank. And that 95% has a little bit more right in here somewhere. And it's magnified to show you this much, which is 2/100ths of a gas tank, or 2/100ths of a percent. So we have one full gas tank, which is 100%. We have 95%, which is 195%. And we have 2/100ths of a percent. So you could write it 195 and 2/100ths of a percent, or 195 and 2/100ths of a percent. Or if you wanted to really write this a different way, which is probably not going to be written very often, 195 and 1/50th of a percent. They're all the same answer. Not quite 156 or 196%, but a little bit more than 195%. We'll go to the third question next. So it says, mentally calculate the following. 50% of 64. So this column right here, with the exception to this last one, are all part of your grade 7 learning. 50% is half of it. So half of $64 would be $32. 25% is half of half, so half of 32. Well, half of 30 is 15. Half of 2 is 1. So 25% of $64 would be $16, or half of 32. 10%, we simply have to take our decimal in $64, move it over one place to get $6.4. But of course, we have to think of that as being cents. And the question you would obviously ask yourself, is that 4 cents or 40 cents? And if I put down an insignificant zero there, it becomes apparent that that's not 4 cents, but rather $6.40. And for 1%, I'm going to take my decimal and move it 2 places over to get 64 cents. And finally, for 1/10 of a percent, the new rule in grade 8 is do it once, twice, 3 times. I have to put a 0 out here in order to keep it, so I would have $0.064. Now, how do I read that? Well, it's actually, if I was to rewrite that a different way, and I think everybody should write this down because it's important, it's 64 thousandths of a dollar, or it's 6.4 cents, or 6 4/10 cents, right? If we're talking about $0.064, it's really 6 cents and almost half a cent more, right? This little part here means it's not quite half a cent. So we would write that, if we use cent notation, as 6.4 cents, or 6 4/10 of a cent, or 6 2/5 of a cent. And in a person's daily life, the place they're going to see that most frequently is probably with gasoline. Gasoline's the only place I can think of where we use fractional amounts of a penny to define how much gas is, because if you think about how many liters of gasoline are sold, if they just had it rounded to the nearest cent, then they're losing a whole lot of revenue from the sale of gasoline, because we have millions of liters of gas sold probably every week. So by moving it one more decimal place, we're actually increasing revenue tens of thousands of dollars every day by just having that one extra decimal place in our cents for taxation. Now, the rest of them here for mental math. 1/2 percent. Now, the other way I could write this, of course, and I didn't write it, and I should have, the same question would be asking, what is 1/2 percent? And the rule is find out what 1% is, and a half a percent would be half of that. So since 1% 64 cents, so half a percent is simply half of 1%, which would therefore be 32 cents since 1% 64. 110% is really 100% and an additional 10%. So since 100% $64 and 10% $6.40, if I combine those two, I get $70.40. And finally, or not finally, but 11.5%, it would be 10% plus 1% plus a half a percent would be equal 11.5. So 10% is 640 plus 1%, which is 64 cents, plus a half a percent, which is, as we said before, 6.4%. So we add those all together. I get $7.10 and 4/10 cents, or $7.10 and 4/10 cents. Both ways would be appropriate to write. Oops, my bright students have notified me that I did not use a tenth of or a half a percent. I always know I used half a percent instead of a tenth, or I should have used this one here. I should have used 32 cents. So I'll put that here. Add those together, I get $7.04, $7.34, $7.36. Now, 99.9%. There are two ways to do it. You could take 50% and 25% and a 10% and a 10% and a 1% and a 1% and a 1%, and then a tenth of a percent and a tenth of a percent and a tenth of a percent and a tenth of a percent. Or the simpler way would be to take 100% and subtract a tenth of a percent, and that would equal 99.9%. So take all of it and subtract a tenth of a percent, and you will get your answer. So $64 is 100%. Take away this tenth of a percent, which is 0.064, which will be, and I'm going to do this on paper for you. There's $64. Take away 64/10 of a cent. 63, that becomes a 10, that becomes a 9, that becomes a 10, that becomes a 9, that becomes a 10, which is a 6, a 3, a 9, a 3, and a 6. So your final answer is $63.93 and 6/10 cents. Just a little bit more, but not much more than $63.93.5. Just a little bit more than that, but not quite $63.94. The next question was actually from chapter 4.2. It's taking fractions, decimals, and percents. It asks for both a fraction and a lowest term fraction. Well, 7/8 is lowest. My students informed me I forgot a question, and I did. I forgot 50.6%. So 50% plus a half a percent plus a tenth of a percent will be 50.6%. So here we have three different things that we add together to get what we call a composite percent, or three different things added together. 50% we knew to be $32. A half a percent we knew to be 32 cents. And a tenth of a percent was this 0.064. Add those together, we get $32.38.4, or $32.38.4. 32, is that right? Did I make a mistake? Are we good? I think so. All right, your questions from 4.2 give you this table asking you to change fractions to decimals, percents to fractions and decimals to both fractions and percentages. So the first one gives you 7/8, which is actually in lowest terms. Now the easiest way, there are two ways we can change 7/8 to a decimal. The easiest way, of course, is to think 7/8 as being 7 divided by 8, and grab a calculator and say, what is 7 divided by 8? And it will tell you 0.875, when that's your answer. 0.875 is a decimal. But the other way you can do it is to change it to an equivalent fraction with either 10, 100, or 1,000 as a denominator. The problem is sometimes fractions are really tricky to change into equivalent fractions, but 8 happens to be one of those fractions that if you memorize it, it becomes really easy, because if you think about what 8 times something is 1,000, the answer is actually 8 times 125 is really 1,000, right? So therefore, to make an equivalent fraction, you can multiply the numerator by 125, and you would get 875 over 1,000, which of course in decimal form is 875,000. So it is possible to make an equivalent fraction, to write it as a decimal, or you could simply divide the numerator by the denominator, and both ways work. Now for your next question, you're asked to change a decimal to a percent, and some of you, Brody, simply like to move your decimal 2 places over to the right because you know it works. And that's fine if you are 100% confident with your abilities. But what I make you do is I make you take this fraction and show me, since percentages are fractions out of 100, show me what the equivalent fraction is out of 100. And therefore, since the numerator of a fraction out of 100 is 87.5, and percentages are fractions out of 100, it is therefore 87.5%. I know what you do. I know what you do. The next question asks you to take the decimal 0.004, and I read it that way because if you read your decimals that way, you're never going to be able to write them as fractions. You have to be able to know your place value. This is your tenths, this is your hundredths, this is your thousandths. So that number is 4 thousandths. And when I read it that way, it's very easy to write it as a fraction because it's 4 over 1,000. Now I know that's not lowest terms because both the numerator and denominator can be divided by a number. In this case, both share the number 4 as a factor. I can reduce it down to 1 over 250. So as a lowest term fraction, 4 thousandths is actually 1 over 250. And again, if I wanted to check my answer, I could actually take the 1 and divide it by the 250. And it would tell me that, yeah, that is exactly 0.004. And once I have it written that way, I'm going to take my fraction over 1,000, and I'm going to make an equivalent fraction over 100. I do so by dividing both numerator and denominator by 10. I get 0.4 out of 100, which is therefore 0.4%. Or if you want to get fancy, it's 0.4% or 0.2%. Most of you probably have that as your answer, but please be aware that both of those other ones are also equivalent fractions. Question number, the last question in this particular one says, this is a percentage. What is it as a fraction and as a decimal? Of course, this is a very important part of our question. So 12.04% or 12 400ths%. Since percentages are fractions out of 100, 12 400ths% would be this is a fraction. So technically, that could go there, but we never want to put fractions that have decimals. So we have to create one that is equivalent, but doesn't have a decimal in the numerator. So since I have to move my decimal 2 places, I'm going to have to multiply it by the number 100, which will be this number over 10,000. And that's the first answer. So 1204 over 10,000 is the fraction that 12.04% represents. Now we have a difficult question trying to figure out what that is in lowest terms. So slide it over here. And I know for sure I can divide by 2, which would be 602 over 5,000. I can divide by 2 again, which would be 301 over 2,500. Now I'm pretty sure that's lowest terms. And I know that because if I try and think about what divides into 301, is there a number? 7 does? Wow. Did 7 divide into 2,500? Okay. So I wouldn't have guessed that 7 divides into 301. It's one of those absurd ones that doesn't have the rule. Obviously, I would check for 2 first. Since it ends in 1, it's not divisible by 2. If I add up 3 plus 0 plus 1, the sum is 4, which means it's not divisible by 3, nor 6. It doesn't end in a 0 or 5, so it's not divisible by 5, etc., etc. So I'm pretty sure that 301 is either a prime number or might divide by 7. I always check to see because I never have a rule for it. It does, but when I check 2500, it doesn't. So then I know for sure, or probably pretty sure, that that is lowest terms. 301 over 2500. And finally, when I want to change it to a decimal, I'm going to use my one with a base 10 denominator. It is read as 1,204 ten-thousandths. This is the tenths, the hundredths, the thousandths, the ten-thousandths. So 1204 ten-thousandths would be 0.1204. And your last question says a $24 t-shirt is discounted 10.5%. Then 15% tax is added to the sale price. What is the final cost? So if I take this rectangle, and we're going to learn how to do this today, and this is a $24 t-shirt. If it's discounted 10.5%, I'm going to imagine that this is a 10.5% discount. So this is going to be taken off the price. So the whole rectangle was $24, and I removed 10.5%. Who can raise their hand now, because I didn't ask this question before. What percent of the shirt are you paying for? Good. Correct. If you are taking a 10.5% discount off something, that means you are only going to pay for 89.5% of the shirt, because the 10.5% is cut off. So there are two ways to do this question then. The first way is to figure out what is 10.5% of $24. Of course, 10.5%, the thinking is 10.5 out of 100, which is 105 over 1,000, which is 0.105. That is 10.5% written as a decimal of $24. Grab your calculator and go, what is 10.5% of $24? And the answer is $2.52. So if I put that number here, that 10.5% of the t-shirt, or $2.52, is going to be taken off of the price of the t-shirt. So now I take my $24 t-shirt, subtract the discount of $2.52. I get an 8, I get a 4, I get a 1, I get a 2. The cost of the shirt after the sale price will be $21.48. So that is one way to do it. You can calculate the sale price and subtract it from the cost of the item. But the second way to do it, which is a much more enjoyable way and much more therapeutic way, if you know that the shirt is only going to cost you 89.5%, then a different way to do it is say, what is 89.5% of the $24 t-shirt? 89.5% is 89.5 over 100, which is 895 over 1,000, which is 895 thousandths. 89.5% of $48. Guess what it's going to be? I'll bet you when we do it, it's going to be this one here, but we'll see. We'll see. So 89.5% of a $24 t-shirt is the same answer that we got here, but we didn't have to subtract it all. There was no subtracting. There was no find the discount and subtract it from the price of the shirt. All I did was I thought of the question like this. If it's a discount of 10.5%, that means I'm only paying for 89.5% of the t-shirt. And if I calculate 89.5% of the t-shirt, I will get $21.48. So you go up to the cash register, you say, how much is this t-shirt? And the cashier says, well, hang on, it's got a 10.5% discount, blah, 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 blah. It's $21.48. Okay, I'll buy it. So you said, perfect. So now the 15% HST that every person has to pay on tax is added on to $21.48. So here I'm going to draw another picture. So this is the $21.48 t-shirt, or 100% of the cost. Now on to that, I have to add on another 15% HST, right? And these two together are going to be the cost of my t-shirt. So what does that look like mathematically? Well, it's going to be 100% and 15% for the tax will be the cost, or simply 115% of the cost. So again, just like the last question, there's two ways to do it. The first way is to figure out, well, what is 15% of the $21.48? What is the tax going to be? 15% is a decimal, sorry, as a fraction first. It's 15 over 100, which is 0.15 of 2148. Grab your calculator. 15% of $21.48 is $3.22, or approximately $3.22. That's the HST. Take the cost of your t-shirt, which is $21.48, Emily. Add on to it $3.22 HST. And the final cost of your shirt will be $24.70. End of story. That's what you pay. Use your debit card, run it through, go home, wear your t-shirt. But the easier way to do it, just like the last question, instead of calculating 15% and then adding it on to $24.70, which is 2 steps, instead of doing that, you could simply use 115% right out of the gate. So 115% of $21.48 will be the cost of the shirt itself and the cost of the tax. 115% is 115 over 100, or 1 and 15 hundredths, or 1 and 15 hundredths is 115%. So 115% of 21.48. Grabez-vous ton calculator. 115% of 21.48 is the same price we got before. The only difference between them is that 2 cents that I rounded right here when I did approximately is factored into your final answer. 1 step versus 2.